Hello, everybody. Good evening. I'm going to try to make this video as quickly as I can. It's a long one, but I'm addressing a letter that was posted on social media on September 12th titled Gender-affirming care shouldn't be ignored, and it was addressed to the Alley Center of Cape Breton. The letter reads as follows. I have been feeling quite disheartened lately with regard to the phobia and transphobia observed worldwide and on a local level. Now it has been brought to my attention that there is a 1 million march for children planned for Sydney on September 20th. The idea behind this initiative is to deter schools from being a safe place for two LGBTQ plus children and youth to be affirmed, supported, and validated in the exploration of their identities. This creates significant barriers for students accessing support and is detrimental to the mental health of students, not to mention potentially forces children and youth into unsafe and dangerous situations. Imagine a trans, non-binary, or gender-diverse student coming out to a teacher or support staff that they trust only to be outed to their parents that reject them. Conservative politicians and right-wing media are weaponizing the term gender ideology and portraying two LGBTQ plus people and allies as groomers trying to indoctrinate and or sexualize children. Of course, this is rooted in misinformation and embedded in homophobia, transphobia, and heteronormativity. Research suggests that Nova Scotia has the most trans, non-binary, and gender-diverse population in the country, and yet wait times for gender-affirming care in this province tend to be longer than is recommended by national and international guidelines around gender-affirming care. Coleman et al. 2022, Department of Pediatrics and Healthy Populations, 2022, Statistics Canada, 2021. Personally, I say thank God for that, eh? She continues. A Canadian study exploring the health of trans and non-binary youth found that 57% of youth from the Atlantic region have experienced discrimination based on sex. 30% reported attempted suicide within the past year, and 22% have run away from home. Alarming numbers. Alarming 71% noted having unmet needs related to emotional or mental health services in the past year. Department of Pediatrics and Healthy Populations Institute, 2022, page 99. Two LGBTQ plus are more likely to experience mental health issues such as anxiety and mood disorders, substance use issues, and suicide. This is a direct result of homophobia and transphobia that queer youth are forced to navigate. New Brunswick recently implemented Policy 713, which requires parental consent for educators and school staff to use the preferred name and pronouns of students under the age of 16. Furthermore, parents would be notified by the school if a student under age 16 years of age requested a change to their gender marker or name within the school system. Saskatchewan has implemented similar policies as well. Use of preferred first name and pronouns by Student Policy 2023. This group is trying to advocate for the same policies to be implemented in Nova Scotia. Experts illustrate the harms associated with these policies. There have been many studies which demonstrate that rejection, example, not using or respecting the youth's asserted name and or pronouns, has been strongly linked to negative outcomes such as anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, and substance use. Coleman al. 2022, page 52. Remaining neutral, such as ignoring or not encouraging the exploration of gender identity, also leads to an increase in mental health issues such as depressive symptoms for gender diverse youth. Gender-affirming care is harm reduction. Gender-affirming care is mental health intervention. Gender-affirming care is suicide prevention. This is consistent across the literature and rooted in evidence. This was posted by Emily MacArthur of Glace Bay. Okay, my response to Emily MacArthur of Glace Bay. So, since I am the organizer for this 1 million march for children in Sydney, Cape Breton, Emily, you speak of certain gender-affirming care is harm reduction. Gender-affirming care is mental health intervention. Gender-affirming care is suicide prevention. When evidence is only shown to one degree, and the evidence of what happens once all of that gender-affirming takes place is not presented, therefore it is the same as lying to the child. Once medical intervention has taken place, and sadly those who do take part in the transitioning, you fail to include those statistics in your letter. So I will give you some statistics and some facts that you did not present in that letter that you posted on September 12th about gender affirmation. And you are correct in the idea that it should not be ignored. So here are some of those facts that you ignored, or perhaps you just weren't aware of when you were writing that letter. Most people understand the concept of only two genders, biologically speaking. However, many do not know what happens after the transition, once puberty blockers and hormone therapy medications are incorporated into a transition regime. No one is talking about the negative effects of this transitioning. So, here is the inconvenient truth. When it comes to gender dysphoria, there are two definitions we should learn. Persisters, those who remain gender dysphoric, and desisters, those who do not remain gender dysphoric. Gender identity disorders in childhood and adolescence states that less than 20% of all cases of gender identity dysphoria in childhood and adolescence are the initial manifestation of irreversible transsexualism. The current state of research on this subject does not allow any valid diagnostic parameters to be identified with which one could reliably predict whether the manifestations of gender identity dysphoria will persist. For example, whether transsexualism will develop within certainty or at least a high degree of probability. Psychosexual outcome of gender dysphoric children says following those who report a gender disorder early on, approximately age group of 14, at follow-up approximately 3.5 years later, 54 children, mean age of 18 years, agreed to participate. 30% of those 77 participants, 19 boys and 4 girls, did not respond to the recruiting letter and were not traceable, while 27%, 12 boys and 9 girls, were still gender dysphoric, persisters group, and 43%, 28 boys and 5 girls, were no longer gender dysphoric, desisters group. A follow-up study of boys with gender identity disorder states in 1989, childhood boys were assessed at a mean age of 7.5 years. In 1995, a follow-up was done, and again in 2002 at a mean age of 20.5 years. Of the 139 participants, 12% were classified as persisters, and the remaining 122, 87%, or 87.8%, were classified as desisters. So long-term follow-up of transsexual persons undergoing sex reassignment surgery under the cohort study in Sweden states The overall mortality for sex-reassigned persons was higher during follow-up than for controls of the same birth sex, particularly death from suicide. Sex-reassigned persons also had an increased risk for suicide attempts and psychiatric inpatient. World Professional Association for Transgender Health Standards of Care says an important difference between gender dysphoric children and adolescents is in the proportionate for whom dysphoria persists into adulthood. Gender dysphoria during childhood does not inevitably continue into adulthood. Rather, in follow-up studies in prepubertal children, mainly boys, who were referred to clinics for assessment of gender dysphoria, the dysphoria persisted into adulthood for less than 20% of children. Cohen-Katenis, 2001, Zucker and Bradley, 1995. Boys in these studies were more likely to identify as gay in adulthood than as transgender. Green, 1987, Money and Russo, 1979, Zucker and Bradley, 1995, Zuger, 1984. Newer studies also include girls showed a mean of 20% persistence rate of gender dysphoria into adulthood. Drummond, Bradley, Peterson, Badali, and Zucker, 2008. Willian and Cohen-Katenis, 2008. Mental health utilization of transgender youth before and after affirming treatment. Further research is needed to clarify the long-term impact of medical affirmation on mental health, including family and social factors associated with the persistence and discontinuation of mental health care needs among transgender dysphoric youth. That's not happening in Canada, you may say. Well, in 2017, the Government of Canada passed Bill C-16, adding gender identity and gender expression to the list of prohibited grounds for discrimination under the Canadian Human Rights Act. The fallout of Bill C-16 has resulted in boys who identify as girls being allowed into girls' washrooms, and concerned parents who attend school board meetings are being silenced for discriminatory speech. The public health care system is adopting the affirmation care model, and children who identify as trans are put on a regime of puberty blockers and hormones, leading to gender transition surgery. So, Emily, your statement that gender-affirming care is harm reduction, gender-affirming care is mental health intervention, gender-affirming care is suicide prevention. Harm reduction for who exactly? Considering that Canadian Pediatric Society's statement on an affirmative approach to caring for transgender and gender-diverse youth says, as the demand for gender-affirming care is anticipated to continue to increase, some healthcare providers may wish to develop the knowledge and skills required to initiate adolescents on hormone-blocking agents and gender-affirming hormones. In the clinical components of gender-affirming care section, it lists hormone blockers, gender-affirming hormones, and gender-affirming surgery. This is what you are talking about, Emily, when it comes to the importance of gender-affirming our children? I truly hope that it is not. Let me ask you this question. Who benefits from this gender-affirming business? In short, Big Pharma. Puberty blockers alone. The share price and profitability as of August of 2023 was $146.59. This is up by over 10% since 2022. So in summary, the data shows that the rates of desistance for gender dysphoria increase with age. The higher the mean age at follow-up, the higher rates of desistance. This would suggest that dysphoria is by and large transitory and likely related to puberty. When the watchful waiting approached this is applied, the overwhelming majority of people will desist by age 25. However, preliminary data for children who receive affirmative care in adolescence indicate that once they start on the hormone therapy, 100% of subjects proceed to sex reassignment, which is associated with dramatically shortened lifespans and significantly higher rates of suicide. Excuse me. Okay. This is what they don't want you to know, hence only providing one side of the story. Once transitioned, patients have no choice but to remain on cross-sex hormones for life. Who benefits? Most certainly not the children who transitioned, coerced at that for the majority. Their lives are ruined, and they will never be able to have their own children. Talk about transition, eh? But big old pharma is making a mint off those who transitioned, and for their short remaining lives will profit big pharma till they eventually will die too young, either from all the treatments and surgeries and the side effects of those surgeries, or from suicide, as they regret the decision they made at such a young age. A child cannot get a driver's license until they are 16. They cannot get a tattoo without parental consent. Yet, in this day and age, children are being told that they can change the biological sex at a whim, if their body doesn't match their mind at any age. This is child abuse, pure and simple. I'm going to quote something from a reputable psychiatrist, Dr. Miriam Grossman. I am a board-certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist, author, and senior fellow at Do No Harm. I have been taking care of patients for 45 years. I'm going to respond to the phrase sex assigned at birth. Sex is not assigned at birth. Sex is established at conception, and it's recognized at birth, if not earlier. To claim that sex is assigned at birth is without any scientific basis whatsoever. Its language misleads people, especially children, into thinking that male and female are arbitrarily designations and can change. This is simply not true. In her book, Lost in Trans Nation, A Child Psychiatrist's Guide Out of the Madness, she states that no child is born in the wrong body. Their bodies are just fine. It's their emotional lives that need healing. Throughout our country, atrocities are taking place in doctors' offices and hospital operating rooms. Physically healthy children and adolescents are being permanently disfigured and sometimes sterilized. Those youth have announced they're transgender, and we, their parents, teachers, therapists, and doctors, are supposed to at once agree with their self-diagnosis and take a back seat as they make the most consequential decisions of their lives to alter their bodies in order to, we are told, align with their minds. Medical, educational, and government authorities advise us to support the gender journey of still developing immature kids, including experimental medical interventions with poor evidence of long-term improvement. Dr. Marian Grossman's practice consists of trans-identified youth and their families. She implores parents to reject the advice of gender experts and politicians and trust their guts, their parental instincts, in the face of an onslaught of ideologically driven misinformation that steers them and their children towards risky decisions that may end up mourning for the rest of their lives. The beliefs that male and female are human inventions separate from biology, that the sex of a healthy newborn is arbitrary and often incorrectly assigned, and that as a result, the child requires affirmation through medical reality is therefore hazardous, especially to children. The core belief that biology can and should be denied is a repudiation of reality and a mockery of what hard science teaches about male and female. Dr. Grossman believes that parents know their child best. They especially know if they have a son or a daughter. But currently in our country, when it comes to gender identity, everyone knows better than mom and dad. Schools hide information from parents and help students live double lives. Patrick at home, Patty at school. Activists tell kids their loving homes are unsafe when parents voice doubts about their child's new identity. For refusing to see their son as their daughter, parents might be reported to protective services. A development can then lead to a family's destruction. Dr. Grossman has been fighting gender ideology and has exposed the dangers and falsehoods of the sexuality and gender industry since 2006. Many parents do not believe that these kinds of treatments are taking place in Canada. Regardless of the countless legal implications they are causing for many families. However, this is only one Canadian-based website as evidence. The following is taken directly from the front page of their website called Trans Youth Can. It states, youth whose gender identity does not match their gender they were assigned at birth have been increasingly referred to pediatric clinics that provide medical care to delay puberty and alter physical sex characteristics to align with their intergender identity. However, while those treatments are generally considered safe, there is very little research on the short and long-term social and medical experiences and outcomes of youth undergoing clinical care. We are conducting a study to learn about the health experiences of trans youth during the first 2 years they come to a clinic to start on puberty blockers or hormones. We are also interested in learning more about the well-being of parents and their caregivers and families with trans youth. The issue of parental rights, freedom of speech, and medical ethics intersect in challenging ways, making it a difficult but necessary conversation for society to have. Many parents caught on the receiving end of these laws feel helpless and coerced into compliance with the state, feeling as if their rights as parents have become irrelevant. Parents feel as if they are being led by the nose to meet government demands, comply, or face severe consequences like the loss of their children or imprisonment. While parents can provide their children's basic needs, they feel restricted in guiding their beliefs and thoughts, a role increasingly being claimed by the government. This situation not only warrants immediate cessation, but it also demands critical scrutiny. The introduction of SOGI and gender ideology being taught in schools is a reality we must confront in Canada. Our children are subjected to medical interventions with potentially hazardous consequences, the long-term effects of which remain largely unexplored. Emily, parental rights are irrelevant, so to speak, gone with the wind. It is unthinkable that a parent would not only be uninformed about these harm-producing procedures, but also helpless to stop them when they become aware of it. What parent would willingly let their children serve as a test subject for such uncertain procedures? That leads us to the 1 Million March for Children. Canadian school boards have decided that they, not a child's parent or guardians, are to hold jurisdiction over Canadian child's sexual identity. This situation raises complex questions about the balance between the state's responsibility to ensure a safe and inclusive educational environment and the parents' rights to guide their children's upbringing based on their own values. Many parents feel uncomfortable with the level of influence that educational institutions and the state seem to have over their children's beliefs and choices. Our goal with this nationwide Million March for Children is to raise awareness about the erosion of parental rights and the manipulation of the struggle for social acceptance by certain entities with their own agendas. We are standing up to free our children from the bondage of indoctrination, breaking the system designed to sexualize our children. Thereby, we are unifying for the children. Even now, most people are unaware of what is going on in libraries and schools across the country. This is why it is so important that the public becomes more aware of the issues at stake. The concerns go beyond the state's influence on children and extend to how the government could potentially be leveraging parental rights to advance a specific agenda. Young children in elementary schools are being sexualized by radical gender ideology. Publicly funded school boards appear to have gone rogue, censoring and silencing parents who express concerns over the appropriateness of sexually explicit content in school libraries and the necessity of gender theory being embedded into the curriculum. The growing number of concerned parents being silenced by radically progressive school boards who are allowing heavily sexualized, at times even pornographic content to be brought into publicly funded classrooms and school libraries should be of concern to everyone, especially parents. With the SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity and/or expression, as well as comprehensive sexuality education is becoming clearly embedded into the school curriculums Canada-wide, and it's more important now to understand what this is and how it is inappropriate for public schools or libraries in our country. Unsurprisingly, SOGI's primary goal is to convince children that the social constructs of gender are fluid, disregarding the truth that all children already know. Humanity is only made up of biological men and women. SOGI has become an avenue to expose minors to sexually explicit, pornographic, and inappropriate learning resources, activities, and events. The material covered in SOGI is shocking as it teaches children to masturbate, experiment sexually with the same sex, consume pornographic cartoon material depicting minors engaged in explicit sexual activity, attend events with nudity, sexually explicit acts, and sexual paraphernalia. Here is an example of a questionnaire that some parents had to answer when their children returned to school. It was titled the Gender Identity Section for 2023. Question 8 says, what is your child's gender identity? Select all that apply. Boy, man, cisgender, gender fluid, gender queer, gender nonconforming, girl, woman, indie queer, non-binary, questioning, trans, two-spirited, not sure, I don't understand this question, I prefer not to answer, gender terms not listed above, please specify. This is what some parents were facing when their children went back to school for the 2023-2024 school year. This is utter nonsense and should not be allowed in public school systems and in our country. Protests are growing from coast to coast. September 20th is no exception. The Million March for Children is about uniting diverse backgrounds and faiths as we share a resolute purpose, advocating for the elimination of teaching young students about the sexual orientation and gender identity expression, the SOGI 123, and comprehensive sexuality education curriculums. Schools across Canada have incorporated gender ideology in their curriculums, that are teaching young students about pronouns, gender ideology, transitioning, and LGBTQ lifestyles and mixed bathrooms at schools. Many believe this is inappropriate for children and that gender ideology has no place in public schools. We will continue this fight for our children, families, and futures. Let kids be kids. Canadian parents have rights. Emily, you are more than welcome to come and speak your truths and share your facts and challenge the facts that I have presented here in this video. I most certainly can share this typed up version for you upon request if you need to have a printed copy. On September 20th, we will be at City Hall at 9 a.m. to 9:45 a.m. and there will be coffee, tea, and hot chocolate, as well as some snacks. There will be speeches, and you are more than welcome to debate this gender affirmation ideology or have your say. We have no issue with dialogue, and we march at 11 a.m. So the 1 Million March for Children is happening all across Canada in every province, in most capital cities, with Halifax and Sydney hosting theirs for Nova Scotia. If you have any questions about the march, go to their website at 1millionmarch4children.com, or for local information, email at 1millionpersonmarch4kids@protonmail.com. Children may not be developmentally ready to tackle complex issues of gender and sexuality. A 7-year-old does not need to understand non-binary gender. A child cannot consent to getting a tattoo, yet understanding puberty blockers, gender transitioning, or gender identity is considered within their grasp. If you were to ask a child under 10 years old what they want for dinner, if it was up to them, most would choose to only eat candy. Critics point out that there is not enough conclusive evidence to support the claim that SOGI education directly reduces depression or suicide rates among youth. This is except for the evidence we already have of youth speaking out against the harms it has caused them. The higher suicide rates among those who undergo gender transition or the negative effects of the puberty blockers. Another common critic of the SOGI education could be seen as academic indoctrination. The absence of alternative viewpoints or the exclusive teaching of SOGI affirming perspectives constitutes its own form of intolerance. However, what do we call teaching something that is not true? Because boys cannot be girls and girls cannot be boys. This is a biological impossibility. The LGBT community has been hijacked by radical activists who are attacking the core freedoms and rights of all Canadians. The political activists are not interested in equal rights, diversity, or inclusion. Their objective is forced compliance and acceptance of their adult sexual proclivities and ideologies. The United Nations is involved in this agenda, and they are targeting children. They have mandated that all member nations implement the comprehensive sexuality education resource. This resource sexualizes children at the earliest age possible. This is causing great harm to minors and is an attack against the traditional family value unit. Okay. Here is something that many probably don't know. In Nova Scotia, we have what is called Beyond the Basics, a resource for educators on sexuality and sexual health. What is this, you might ask? Well, it's a Trojan horse brought into schools under the guise of creating a sex-positive anti-oppressive learning environment, but it's really intended to sexualize children at the earliest age possible. The Canadian government, as well as the education system, has been infiltrated by radical LGBTQ activists who are using the Beyond the Basics resource to promote homosexuality and transgender ideology and normalize sexual deviancy. The resource promotes and endorses vile, sexually explicit, and pornographic books, which are available to children and youth through the schools, as well as in public libraries and online. This is resulting in many young people being exposed to pornographic materials and websites, being encouraged to masturbate and experience sexually with the same sex. They are also being indoctrinated into believing their gender is fluid and non-binary. As a consequence, a growing number of young people are tragically experiencing rapid onset dysphoria, and the only treatments offered are puberty blockers and/or surgeries that permanently mutilate their bodies and sterilize them. The LGBTQ trans activists are manipulating society to accept their agenda by victimizing trans people and saying that kids who struggle with gender identity are at a heightened risk of suicide, and therefore we need to support them in order to help them feel accepted. The reality is that there is a 20% increase in suicide for those who transition, and transgender regret is exploding as individuals realize that they were deceived into following this path. Essentially, they are promoting homosexuality transgender ideology. Silence is no longer an option. The very well-being of our children is at stake. Remember, parents have rights, and we must protect those rights. So come out on Wednesday, September 20th, at City Hall in Sydney at 9 a.m. for the 1 Million March for Children. Leave our kids alone. Save the children. Hands off our kids. Let kids be kids. Being inclusive should not be confused with being intrusive. There is a difference. No gender ideology in public schools. Resist gender education.